Next on PIJN News, Dr. Chaps reports on these important issues.
Religious freedom in the battleground state of Ohio. Should Christian pastors be forced to participate in homosexual marriages? We interview Chris Long with Ohio Christian Alliance.
Former Navy chaplain Gordon James Klingenschmidt took a stand to defend religious freedom by daring to pray publicly in Jesus' name. Now he helps you by reporting the news, discerning the spirits, and praying the scriptures. Would you pray with us? Here's Dr. Chaps.
God bless you in Jesus' name. My name is Chaplain Gordon James Klingenschmidt, Dr. Chaps, and you're watching PIJN News. On this show, we normally like to report the news, discern the spirits, and pray the scriptures in Jesus' name. But today we have a live news-making interview with our returning guest and a longtime friend of mine personally and of this ministry, Chris Long, who is president of the Ohio Christian Alliance. We're here to talk about religious freedom today in the battleground state of Ohio. Chris, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, chaps. Good to be with you.
So thank you, first of all, for coming all the way from Ohio to Colorado, where we happen to record. But this is a nationwide audience. We're on the NRB network, and all the eyes are on Ohio.
Yes.
On yesterday's show, we talked about the Republican National Convention. We talked about your dealings with Governor John Kasich and Donald Trump, who spoke at the RNC, is now the Republican nominee. If people want to see that show, they should go to our YouTube or Roku channel. But today, I want to talk to you about Ohio Christian Alliance and how your Christian organization has taken a political stand for religious freedom in the battleground state of Ohio. Remind our audience who you are and about Ohio Christian Alliance.
Well, thank you, chaps. I'm the president of the Ohio Christian Alliance, a public policy voter education organization that's been around since 1991. And we work at the Ohio State House and in Washington, D.C., and we really are the voice of the church in the halls of government. And what the concern is right now among the clergy is, after the SCOTUS decision on homosexual marriage, is religious liberty. In fact, we have no coverage or protection in the state of Ohio. There is real exposure to lawsuits, to injury to the church. And we're seeing that happen in the state of Ohio. So clergy are very much concerned. In fact, we've held several pastor policy conferences to address this very issue. They've been closed to the media, closed-door meetings to pastors only. We've had legal teams come in to verse them on how they need to shore up their bylaws and the language of how they define a marriage within their church. We've had Attorney David Gibbs of the Christian Law Association come in and speak extensively to pastors of what they need to do legally to protect themselves against these lawsuits.
Well, let's dial back a second and take a 40,000-foot view of this. In America, since our nation's founding, since the Constitution, we've had the First Amendment, which protects religious freedom to some extent, which protects free speech to some extent, and yet, over the years, the Supreme Court has reinterpreted the First Amendment. So there's been a gradual liberalizing towards this new movement, which is homosexual rights. And if you look at the conflict now between Supreme Court decisions when it comes to a gay person's right to not be discriminated against versus a church member's right to not be forced by the government to participate in someone's gay marriage, there's a real battle here, and it's not always a clean decision.
Well, that's right. This whole debate has brought up a whole plethora of concerns for those in the private sector and their religious beliefs, and also in the church community. Pastors are beginning to wonder, well, if I'm licensed by the state of Ohio, do I now have to comply if the state is recognizing homosexual marriage? That if I refuse a same-sex couple that comes to the church and says, well, we want to get married here, then am I liable as a pastor? And this is a concern that's happening.
Because when people get married in every state, not just Ohio, they get a license from the state, perhaps of Ohio, that they're married in the eyes of the government, but also maybe a license from the church where they're married in the eyes of God, and the pastor signs both of those licenses, so to speak.
That is correct. And so it's obviously a religious ceremony of man and woman coming together in holy matrimony. And it's an ordinance of the church in observance of family and friends and witnesses on that day. As
Following Jesus' teaching, he did the miracle at Cana for the wedding, and he also taught in Matthew 19 that marriage is between one man and one woman.
That is right, and that a man should leave his father and mother and be joined unto his wife, and the two shall be one flesh. And so this is very much steeped in the scriptures of how God ordains the family and begins with that nucleus of a man and a woman. Well, that's what we believe, obviously, as the church, and has been the long-standing tradition of the church for many centuries and millennial. Well, what do we see? We're seeing a threat to religious liberty. You mentioned the Constitution, obviously the First Amendment that our founding fathers gave us in the Bill of Rights and the Constitution. Certainly we have the Constitution, and no one is saying that we don't have the religious freedom. But there comes a time in every generation that those group of people need to be reminded of those religious rights that actually predate the Constitution, predate the Magna Carta, in fact go all the way back to the fundamental rights of man, the right of freedom of worship and religious freedom. So this is a generation that needs to be reminded of that. Well, one of the things to do is statute law back in the states. What constitutional attorneys said on the steps of the Supreme Court when the SCOTUS decision came down in favor of homosexual marriage, they said states must now move quickly to enact statute legislation to protect religious liberty. In fact, if you think of Thomas Jefferson, who was an anti-federalist and one who pushed for the Bill of Rights and the First Amendment, on his gravestone there at Monticello in the back, it reads of the three things he wants to be noted for: author of the Declaration of Independence, founder of the University of Virginia, and author of the Virginia Religious Statute. And so this is so important. And we brought that up to Ohio legislators. In fact, there's so much concern among clergymen. I spoke to a church, and afterwards I met with its committee, and the president of the board of that Lutheran church announced to me and said, "Chris, we just had 15 ministers in our town retire their ministerial license with the state of Ohio. They will continue to conduct the religious aspect and ordinance of the marriage, but the couple will have to go to the Justice of Peace to get the actual license, because they do not want to be dictated to by the state in any regard that is outside the bounds of that which is their truly held religious belief."
So pastors are running scared. This also is now threatening vendors, for like photographers or cake makers or florists, and some of them are being forced to participate in gay weddings, or else they're accused of discrimination.
Well, that's right, and there's those who are emboldened by that decision, and they're taking aggression. They don't want to live and let live, as it were, okay? They're coming after. In fact, there was one lesbian activist who said, once the decision came down, and she was asked by a reporter, "Are you happy now that the court has finally recognized same-sex marriage?" She said, "No, we're going after those who still object." And she said, "Are you meaning those in the church?" She said, "Yes."
Well, that is as clear a threat as I can see, and it requires a Christian response. The church must stand up and get these religious freedom laws passed. When we come back from this short break, I'll ask Chris Long about the battle to protect pastors in the state of Ohio.
This is PIJN News, defending your religious freedom. Dr. Chaps will be right back.
Do you care about your family? About your children? Of course you do. But you need to take action today because they're under attack. Sign a petition at prayinjesusname.org to protect traditional marriage. Here are 3 specific petitions you can sign. Number 1 is to stop ENDA. This is the so-called Employment Non-Discrimination Act, but it's actually a bathroom bill that will punish Christians. It's introduced by a homosexual congressman, Jared Polis from Colorado, and it's really just a bathroom bill in disguise. Ladies and little girls, next time you go into the ladies' room at any public restaurant, you might run into somebody who looks like this if ENDA becomes law. We need to stop this because here's the actual language of the bill. They don't want you to read this. It says dress or grooming standards must be permitted for any employer who has an employee who's undergoing or may someday undergo a gender transition after the time of employment. Well, this gives them permission to have the same dress or grooming standards to which they're transitioning. In other words, they don't even need a sex change. A man can go into a ladies' room and assault you and your little girl if ENDA becomes law. And they'll punish the Christian business owner if he doesn't allow that. Number 2 petition you can sign is to stop the Homosexual Classrooms Act. That's being introduced by Senator Al Franken of Minnesota, actually to defund your public school if you don't force the teachers to promote homosexuality to all of the children as young as kindergarten in the guise of anti-bullying lectures. You're really just recruiting your kids into the gay agenda. Petition number 3 you can sign at prayinjesusname.org is to defend traditional marriage. The 1996 Defense of Marriage Act is under fire, but it defines marriage simply between one man and one woman. Sign these petitions today. Go to prayinjesusname.org and take action.
Empowering you, the grassroots activist. Here is Dr. Chaps.
Welcome back. I'm Dr. Chaps. In light of the Supreme Court's decision in the case of Obergefell versus Hodges about a year ago, now the repercussions of that homosexualization of marriage in all 50 states are now having an impact on religious freedom in each of the 50 states. Here again in the studio is Chris Long of the Ohio Christian Alliance. Chris, when we talk about protecting Christians' rights, there has been this discussion nationally since 1992 of something called the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, RFRA. People call it RFRA. And that is a federal law that was signed by Bill Clinton, upheld by the Supreme Court, that says the government can only infringe upon your First Amendment rights if they have a compelling government interest to do so, and only if they do so in the least restrictive means possible to give you the most religious freedom possible. Now that federal law has been upheld. It is the law of the land, but now it's under threat. Because of the Obergefell decision, these attacks are happening state by state by the gay rights movement against the Christian freedom movement. Here, for example, in Colorado, they came after the baker, Jack Phillips, to say you must bake gay wedding cakes or else you could lose your baker's license. We tried in Colorado to pass a state version of RFRA that was blocked by the Democrats, so now bakers in Colorado must make gay wedding cakes. We saw also in North Carolina, the state passed a bill to block co-ed bathrooms. Or in Indiana, Governor Mike Pence signed an Indiana version of RFRA to protect pastors and Christians and bakers so they don't have to participate in gay weddings. What is Ohio's state?
Well, there's a political element to all of this. And when the presidential campaign during the primary season was still going on, our governor, John Kasich, basically was asked these questions. Actually, before the SCOTUS decision, he was asked by a reporter, well, are you going to do a Religious Freedom Restoration Act like Indiana did? He says, no, we don't need that here in Ohio. We have a good balance. We have a hiring language that's inclusionary, and we have a marriage amendment. Well, just a few months later, we have it in imbalance because the court, through the SCOTUS decision on homosexual marriage, struck down, supposedly, the marriage laws of the states. So that's when we moved quickly and said, look, we need to have statute legislation to protect pastors and also RFRA law. Well, the governor on the campaign trail said that he would not support a RFRA law, but he did say we have to protect our pastors. Well, that's where we began our discussion. So a bill was introduced by State Representative Nino Vitelli and 24 co-sponsors called the Ohio Pastor Protection Act, and it will protect pastors, churches, church organizations, and church property in this aspect of those who would challenge them on their religious beliefs if a homosexual couple would come, or anyone really wanting a marriage that does not align with the church's teaching. Then the church, obviously, it will do and practice their religious belief. That bill actually had several hearings in committee, but then was bottled up in committee by the chairman and the Speaker of the House. We've had meetings with him, and then they recessed for the summer. We had over 36 pastors come in from all over the state of Ohio, including the Catholic Diocese of Greater Cincinnati, a number of Lutheran, Methodist, Presbyterian, Orthodox churches all came in, Baptist, Independent, you name it. It was the largest variety of denominational expression I've ever seen in one room, including a Jewish rabbi, all coming in supporting the legislation. And yet, It did not pass out of committee as of yet. And so this to me is a slam dunk. If the governor is saying we need to protect pastors, well, here's the perfect opportunity.
So wait, let me get this straight. In Ohio, the state house is in Republican or Democrat hands?
Republican.
And the Republicans in the state house couldn't pass something to protect pastors? We're not even talking about bakers and florists and photographers. We're just saying the government cannot force a pastor to participate in a gay wedding. And the Republicans block that? Why would they do that?
The bill actually has bipartisan support. State Representative from Greater Cleveland is a co-sponsor of the bill, a Democrat, and he sits on the committee. So there's enough votes in committee to get it out of committee and onto the floor. So there was frustration. A discharge petition was filed, probably the 11th hour on a late session night. You being a state representative have experienced that.
Now explain a discharge petition for our viewers.
A discharge petition is if a bill is in committee and it's still stuck in committee, a discharge petition by a majority of the legislators will take it out of committee onto the floor for an up or down vote. Bypasses the committee process because the committee process is basically stuck. Or broke in this instance, because the chairman's not letting it go forward, the leadership's not letting it go forward. So the discharge petition was filed.
So you had a majority of state legislators wanting to get a floor vote, and did it get out of committee then?
Well, only a handful signed it that night, but they had to quickly go home, and so they haven't been back to the State House since to sign the discharge petition because it is held up in the clerk's office. So they'll come back August 2nd. I do believe we'll see the list of signatures grow on that discharge petition. But since then, we have had good discussion with the Speaker and with the chairman of that committee, and we're hoping that the process, we really do want the process to move forward. But we want the bill to move forward because time is of the essence, chaps. These pastors, these churches really do have exposure by lawsuits, and time's a wasting. We need to do something.
Talk about that. There has been a lawsuit recently in Ohio?
Actually, there was a Catholic school in Greater Cleveland, in Columbus, that was sued by a lesbian. It had come to light that she had a live-in relationship with a lesbian woman, and this was not prior knowledge of the school, and she was teaching this Catholic school.
Wait a minute. You have a teacher at a Catholic school teaching the children, God knows what she's teaching them, but it comes out that she happens to be a lesbian. Did the Catholic school fire her?
They did, because they said, look, the problem we have here is you did not divulge this upon your hiring. It goes against our church teaching and our ordinances and bylaws, so you can no longer teach here. Well, she sued them. Well, the local ordinance of Columbus, okay, this is again, we don't have any statute language on the books in Ohio, but the city of Columbus passed a LGBT-friendly protection bill, okay, and they're using that in precedence in the court, and the judge sided against the school.
Against the Catholic Church?
Yes, sir.
So now this local ordinance in Columbus is being enforced instead of a statewide law, because Ohio doesn't have a statewide law protecting pastors, or in this case, protecting Catholic schools.
Yep. And for those who would say, well, they have the Constitution, the First Amendment, and even the Ohio Constitution. Well, where was that in regard to this judge's decision to side against the school?
In my experience, these liberal judges ignore the First Amendment, ignore religious freedom, and they enforce these little parochial ordinances to violate our Christian religious freedom.
And let's say for the record, the school, they obviously love this person, and they meant no ill intent. What it is her lifestyle is incongruent. It is in violation to their church code morally. So it's not as if they don't love the individual, but you cannot teach our children if you're in this lifestyle.
Yeah, and it sets a bad moral example. We're going to take another short break. When we come back, we'll ask Chris Long, what are the future battles in Ohio?
Giving you a megaphone in Washington, D.C. Dr. Chaps will be right back.
How is your marriage doing? I want to tell you about an exciting new 4-part video DVD Bible study series on God's plan for marriage. In this video series, we team up with marriage and family ministry expert Vince D'Acchioli.
There are a lot of things that get in the way of our ability to have a healthy marriage. But the way God intended it, He always wanted us to see His view of our relationship together. So everything we do when we talk about marriage, or whether we're talking to men or whether we're talking to pastors and leaders, it all centers around this idea of vision. It's very important that we understand who God is and our relationship with Him is right in order for us to be able to live out really and truly Ephesians.
And that also informs our role as men, how to love our wives. We can't really love them unless we understand the love of God.
Exactly. So if you just think about love, we tend to think that love is an emotion. It's more something that I feel, whereas the true definition of love, the way Jesus intended it, is not just an emotion, but it's charity. It's what I do. You know, to the degree that I am able to see my wife or my spouse through His eyes, that determines everything in my relationship.
Yeah. And we go through the scriptures in 4 different parts. Part 1 is God's design for man and woman. Part 2 is godly roles for husband and wife. 3 is sex and intimacy within godly marriage. And also God's plan for divorce. You want to have this important 4-part video series available for a suggested donation of $30 if you call our toll-free prayer line at 866-OBEY-GOD. Again, that's 866-OBEY-GOD. Or visit our website, prayinjesusname.org. You too can have a godly marriage.
He is the intersection of church and state. Here is Dr. Chaps.
Welcome back. I'm Dr. Chaps, joined for one more segment on religious freedom, especially for pastors in Ohio. Chris Long, thank you again for coming on the show. In the last segment, you're talking about the lawyers for the LGBT movement are suing the Catholic Church to force them to hire lesbian teachers for Catholic school children. And that reminds me of something happening out in California. This week, the legislature in California is going to, or they're trying to, revoke the religious exemption. In other words, to force Christian and Catholic and private schools to teach homosexual lessons to all the children. Here in Colorado, we tried to pass a RFRA bill that was blocked by the Democrats. We also tried to pass a Pastors Protection Act. I was, in fact, the state representative at the time introducing House Bill 1123, which passed in Texas, by the way, 142 to 0. Mm-hmm. Even the Democrats in Texas wanted religious freedom for pastors, but the Democrats here in Colorado are on record. They said, no, we want to force pastors to do gay weddings in Christian churches here in Colorado. And so they blocked that legislation. But now there's this new movement, the transgender movement, which is the T in LGBT. We've seen it in North Carolina in particular, where the state wanted to protect Christian business owners from being forced to open up co-ed bathrooms and locker rooms to cross-dressing men to go into women's places of undress to violate their privacy and violate their little girls' safety. Have you seen this in Ohio?
Absolutely. Of course, the Target stores have opened up their bathrooms, and there's been protests in Ohio at the Target stores, and there has been, of course, a boycott that's being successful. You can see the revenues and the stock value of Target stores is plummeting because they have made this decision. That's the private sector. But also on the public side, we're seeing some local municipalities again begin to create transgender bathrooms at the local libraries or at the local school. People are just beginning to wake up of what's happening here. And of course, then comes the edict almost of President Obama to across the spectrum of the United States in every state where he wants to open up transgender bathrooms to transgenders.
Now, this is not a one-stall private room where a man or a woman could go in there by themselves. This is actually women's locker rooms where they're letting men go in there where they could be undressing in front of little girls.
That's right, and that's why the public's outraged. Mike DeWine, Attorney General, has filed suit against the Obama action on this issue. And so we're very encouraged by that. So there is a fight going on in Ohio. But when it comes to the legislation, once again, the governor has said that he has no interest in doing a bathroom bill. But we'll see as the lame duck session after the election comes back and then into January just what the tone is in Ohio. But I think things are going to be heating up. And so this notion where he says, well, why don't we all get along and stop suing each other? And, well, that'd be great, Governor. But the fact of the matter is the LGBT community, they're going to come after Christians. They're going to come against anyone who doesn't agree with their lifestyle.
And when President Obama and his Secretary of Education and Loretta Lynch, the Department of Justice, they faxed this letter to all the public school districts saying you must open up the girls' bathrooms and locker rooms to cross-dressing boys in public schools, there was a response in Ohio. Was it by Attorney General Mike DeWine?
Absolutely. In fact, there was a local councilman who reached out to me and he says, hey, we got a problem here. He talked about the library because one of his constituents brought it up to him about a transgender use of the local public library. And as a city councilman, it's first that had come to his knowledge. Then he realized that a friend of his had said, hey, the school was trying to contract me to build a third bathroom at the local high school. He realized and connected the dots that it's probably a transgender bathroom. So here the school, without even notifying the community, was moving forward with this paperwork that came down by probably the Department of Education and the Obama administration. But there was an announcement, this was 6 months ago, long before he made his recent announcement. So this has been underway for some time from the White House of what they want to see happen and basically fundamentally change America. Remember, he said that repeatedly. And this is what he wants to do. The man who put floodlights on the White House of the rainbow colors after the SCOTUS decision on homosexual
But the man
marriage.
standing up to him, to President Obama nationwide, is Ohio Attorney General Mike DeWine, who is going to maybe be running for Ohio governor in 2 years.
That's correct, and he has joined, other attorney generals in this lawsuit. So we're very encouraged by that. And then there are a number of legislators that want to move these bills forward and start having this discussion. So we sat down with the speaker and I said, look, Mr. Rosenberger, we just want to have a conversation here about religious liberty. So I told him some of the stories that are taking place out there in and around the Ohio landscape when it comes to churches and clergy. And so I think his eyes were open somewhat of just how this really is a threat.
We're out of time, but Chris, I discern the Spirit of God upon you. You are God's man in Ohio, making these important fights. What is your website again?
OhioCA.org, or just Google Ohio Christian Alliance.
Our guest has been Chris Long. We're out of time, but I'm Dr. Chaps. Visit our website, prayinjesusname.org. We'll see you next time.
Chaplain Klingenschmitt is a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy who earned his Ph.D. in theology from Regent University. As a former Navy chaplain, by taking a public stand for freedom of speech and religious expression, and by sacrificing his own 16-year career and $1 million pension, he was vindicated by the U.S. Congress, who changed the law and restored freedom for military chaplains to pray in Jesus' name. Dr. Chaps not only defended the Constitution, but his petitions have helped change the law in 10 states, restoring freedom to pray in Jesus' name. Dr. Chaps needs your financial support to stay on the air. Would you please send your best donation today? Please visit prayinjesusname.org to donate online. Or you can mail a check to Pray in Jesus' Name Ministries, Post Office Box 77077, Colorado Springs, Colorado 80970. You can also call us toll-free right now at 866-OBEY-GOD. That's 866-OBEY-GOD. Please sign up for our free emails at prayinjesusname.org. Again, that's prayinjesusname.org.